I am Cheops. My name may have reached you on the desert wind, or in the shadows of my Great Pyramid.
Many speak about me, but few voices truly know the story of the man I have been. Tonight, I would like to take you on a journey through my time, when the Nile flowed peacefully and the Egyptian sun ruled over everything. Allow me to tell you my story, not as a distant pharaoh, but as a man who tried to leave a mark in the sands of time.
Welcome. Let yourself relax, breathe deeply, and allow your mind to travel backward through time. Tonight we journey to a world of golden sands and ancient mysteries, to an age when gods walked alongside mortals, and when the greatest monument ever built by human hands rose stone by stone toward the heavens. We travel to the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, the second ruler of Egypt's fourth dynasty and the visionary behind the Great Pyramid of Giza. Close your eyes and imagine the landscape of ancient Egypt more than 4,500 years ago. Picture the mighty Nile River, its waters flowing northward like a ribbon of life through an endless expanse of sand and stone. Along its banks, civilization flourishes. Villages and cities dot the fertile floodplain, their mud brick buildings painted white to reflect the relentless sun. Palm trees sway gently in the warm breeze, their fronds rustling with a sound like whispered secrets from the past. The year is approximately 2,589 years before the Common Era. The sun rises over the eastern desert, painting the sky in shades of deep orange, pink, and gold. As the first rays of light touch the waters of the Nile, fishermen are already at work, their papyrus boats gliding silently across the mirror-smooth surface. The air is still cool from the night, carrying with it the scent of river water, lotus blossoms, and the smoke of cooking fires. This is Egypt during what historians would later call the Old Kingdom, a period often described as a golden age of prosperity, stability, and unprecedented architectural achievement. The land is unified under a single ruler, a god-king whose authority extends from the Mediterranean Sea in the north to the cataracts of Nubia in the south. The people believe their pharaoh is not merely a man, but a living deity, the earthly embodiment of the falcon god Horus, and upon death, destined to join the sun god Ra in his eternal journey across the sky. In this world of divine kingship and monumental ambition, one ruler would leave a mark on history more indelible than any other. His name was Khufu, meaning, "The god Khnum protects me," though history would remember him simply as Khufu. He was the son of King Sneferu, the founding pharaoh of the fourth dynasty, and Queen Hateferes I, a woman of royal blood whose tomb would later be discovered near her son's great monument, filled with treasures that spoke of wealth and refinement. To understand Khufu's reign, we must first understand the world he inherited. Let us travel back slightly further in time to the years just before Khufu's ascension to the throne, when his father Sneferu ruled over Egypt with wisdom and ambition. Sneferu was a king remembered by his people as benevolent and pleasure-loving. a ruler who brought prosperity to his kingdom and pushed the boundaries of architectural innovation. During Sneferu's reign, which lasted approximately 24 years, Egypt witnessed a revolution in pyramid construction. The great king commissioned not one, not two, but 3 pyramids during his lifetime. First came the pyramid at Meidum, where Sneferu experimented with transforming an older step pyramid into a smooth-sided true pyramid. The transition was not entirely successful, and parts of the outer casing collapsed, giving the monument its distinctive appearance. Not discouraged, Sneferu moved his attention to Dashur, where he commissioned the construction of what would become known as the Bent Pyramid. This remarkable structure began with sides angling steeply upward at 54 degrees, but partway through construction, the angle suddenly changed to a more gentle 43 degrees, creating the distinctive bent appearance that gives the pyramid its name. Modern scholars believe structural concerns during construction prompted this change, as architects worried the steeper angle might lead to collapse. Finally, Sneferu succeeded in building the Red Pyramid, also at Dashur, with its sides rising at the more conservative 43-degree angle from base to apex. This pyramid, named for the reddish hue of its limestone blocks, was the first true smooth-sided pyramid successfully completed in Egypt, and it demonstrated that Sneferu's architects had finally mastered the engineering challenges that had plagued earlier attempts. These massive building projects moved more stone than any other ruler in Egyptian history would transport. They required the mobilization of thousands of workers, the organization of complex supply chains, and the development of sophisticated construction techniques. Most importantly, they laid the groundwork for what would come next. When Sneferu died and his son Khufu ascended to the throne, the young pharaoh inherited not only a kingdom, but also the accumulated knowledge and experience of 3 pyramid projects. Khufu was likely in his 20s when he became king of Egypt. Imagine him on the day of his coronation, standing in the great palace at Memphis, the capital city that had been founded at the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt nearly 6 centuries earlier. Memphis was a thriving metropolis, its streets bustling with merchants, craftsmen, priests, and government officials. The palace complex was vast, with painted columns soaring toward ceilings decorated with stars and sacred symbols, courtyards filled with gardens and reflecting pools, and treasure rooms storing the wealth of the nation. On this momentous day, Khufu underwent the sacred rituals that would transform him from mortal prince to divine king. Priests adorned him with the regalia of kingship, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, combining the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt into a single powerful symbol of unified rule. He held the crook and flail, ancient symbols of royal authority that connected him to Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection. Around his neck hung amulets and pectorals of gold, lapis lazuli, and turquoise, each one inscribed with protective spells and the names of the gods. The young pharaoh chose his official titulary, the series of names that would define his reign. His birth name, Khufu, honored the ram-headed god Khnum, the divine potter who was believed to have created humanity on his potter's wheel, and who controlled the life-giving annual flood of the Nile. This name connected Khufu to creation itself, suggesting that he saw himself as a creator god, one who would shape Egypt's destiny as Khnum shaped human beings from Nile clay. Interestingly, Khufu also used a shorter version of his name, simply Khufu, without the divine element. Scholars have puzzled over this choice. Why would a pharaoh who claimed divine status sometimes omit the god's name from his own? Perhaps it was practical shorthand, or perhaps it reflected a more complex understanding of kingship that acknowledged both the divine and human aspects of the ruler's role. As the coronation ceremonies concluded and Khufu took his place on the throne of the two lands, he faced the enormous responsibility of governing one of the most sophisticated civilizations the world had yet seen. Egypt in the early 4th Dynasty was experiencing what historians would later call its golden age. The Nile flooded reliably each year, depositing nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain and ensuring abundant harvests of wheat, barley, and flax. The granaries were full, trade routes extended to distant lands, and Egypt's borders were secure from external threats. The administrative structure of the kingdom was highly centralized, with all authority flowing from the pharaoh himself. Below the king stood the vizier, essentially a prime minister who oversaw the day-to-day governance of the realm. For Khufu, this crucial position was filled by his kinsman Hemiunu, a man who would prove to be not only an exceptional administrator, but also one of history's greatest architects. Beneath the vizier were various departments overseeing taxation, justice, construction projects, religious affairs, and the military. The kingdom was divided into administrative regions called nomes, each governed by a nomarch appointed by the pharaoh. These regional governors were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining irrigation systems, administering justice, and ensuring that their districts contributed their required share of labor and resources to royal projects. During the 4th Dynasty, these nomarchs were still firmly under royal control, though in later periods they would become increasingly independent, eventually helping to bring about the collapse of the Old Kingdom. Let us imagine a day in Khufu's life as pharaoh. The sun has barely risen when the king awakens in his private chambers within the palace. Servants immediately attend to him, bringing water for washing and helping him dress in the fine linen garments befitting a god-king. The linen is of the highest quality, woven so finely that it is nearly translucent, bleached brilliant white through repeated washing, and pleated in the intricate patterns that denote royal status. After his morning ablutions, Khufu proceeds to the palace shrine where he performs the daily ritual of offerings to the gods. As both king and high priest, he is responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order that keeps chaos at bay and ensures the continued prosperity of Egypt. He offers bread, beer, meat, and incense to the statues of the gods, reciting prayers that have been passed down through generations. These rituals are not merely symbolic. The Egyptians believed that without these daily offerings, the gods would withdraw their favor. The Nile would fail to flood and disaster would befall the kingdom. Following the morning rituals, Khufu breaks his fast with a meal of bread, beer, and perhaps some dates or figs. Ancient Egyptian bread was coarse by modern standards, often containing grit from the grinding stones that the grain was milled upon, but it was nourishing and formed the staple of every Egyptian's diet, from the lowliest peasant to the divine pharaoh himself. The beer, too, was a dietary staple, thick and nutritious, consumed by adults and children alike, since the water of the Nile, while life-giving, could also carry disease. After breakfast, Khufu moves to the audience hall where he holds court. The hall is magnificent, with towering columns painted in brilliant colors, walls covered with reliefs depicting the king smiting his enemies and offering tribute to the gods, and a raised dais where the throne sits beneath a golden canopy. High-ranking officials, priests, foreign ambassadors, and noblemen wait for the privilege of appearing before their god-king. The vizier Hemiunu stands at the pharaoh's right hand, ready to advise on matters of state. First comes the daily report on the kingdom's affairs. Messengers have arrived from the turquoise mines in the Sinai Peninsula, bringing news of the latest expedition's success in extracting the precious blue-green stone so prized for jewelry and amulets. Other reports tell of the diorite quarries in Nubia, where workers labor in the harsh desert to extract the extremely hard black stone favored for statuary, and of the granite quarries near Aswan in the south, where enormous blocks of pink and gray stone are being prepared for transport north to Memphis and Giza. Trade officials present accounts of exchanges with Byblos, the great port city in modern-day Lebanon, where Egyptian copper tools and weapons are traded for the precious cedar wood that Egypt so desperately needs. The cedar of Lebanon is prized above all other timber because of its superior quality, its pleasant aroma, and its resistance to decay. Egypt's native trees, primarily the date palm, sycamore, and acacia, produce wood that is either too soft, too brittle, or available only in short lengths. For the construction of boats, buildings, and fine furniture, imported cedar is essential. Documents discovered more than 4,000 years later would confirm the existence of these trading networks. In 2013, archaeologists working at the ancient port of Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast made a remarkable discovery. Papyri dating to the 27th year of Khufu's reign, the oldest papyrus documents ever found in Egypt. These papyri included the diary of an official named Merer, who supervised teams of workers transporting limestone blocks from the Tura quarries to Giza for the construction of the Great Pyramid. The diary entries are remarkably detailed and bureaucratic, recording the daily activities of Mirror's crew with the precision one might expect from a well-organized administration. They describe how the workers would cast off from Tura with their boats loaded with stone, spend the night at a way station, and then continue on to Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, which was the ancient name for the pyramid complex at Giza. These documents provide invaluable insight into the logistics of pyramid construction and confirm that the project was organized with extraordinary efficiency. But on this particular morning in our imagined day, Khufu is not thinking about papyri that will be discovered in the distant future. His attention is focused on the most ambitious project ever conceived by a mortal mind. The construction of his eternal resting place, a pyramid so vast, so perfectly proportioned, and so precisely constructed that it would stand as a wonder of the world for more than 4 millennia. Khufu had likely begun planning his pyramid complex shortly after ascending to the throne. This was not unusual. Egyptian pharaohs typically began work on their tombs early in their reigns, knowing that the construction of such monuments required many years, even decades, to complete. But Khufu's vision went far beyond anything that had been built before. Where his father Sneferu had built pyramids of impressive size, Khufu would build one that dwarfed them all. The pharaoh consulted closely with Hemunu, who served not only as vizier but also as the chief architect of the pyramid project. Hemunu was a remarkable man in his own right, a member of the royal family and one of the most capable administrators and engineers of his age. He would later be buried in a magnificent mastaba tomb near the Great Pyramid, and a statue of him, now in a museum in Germany, shows a corpulent man with an air of confident authority. This statue is larger than the only surviving statue of Khufu himself, a tiny ivory figurine barely 3 inches tall, which is ironically the only complete portrait we have of the man who built the largest stone structure in the ancient world. Together, Khufu and Hemunu chose the location for the pyramid complex. They selected the Giza Plateau, a limestone escarpment on the west bank of the Nile, about 8 miles south of Memphis. The choice was deliberate and symbolic. The west bank of the Nile was traditionally associated with death and the afterlife, as this was where the sun set each evening, symbolically dying before its nightly journey through the underworld. The plateau itself was elevated above the surrounding landscape, providing a commanding view and ensuring that the pyramid would be visible for miles around. Moreover, the Giza Plateau offered practical advantages. The bedrock was solid limestone, providing a stable foundation for the enormous weight of the pyramid. The site was close enough to the Nile that boats could deliver materials via canals, yet high enough to be safe from the annual flooding. And crucially, the plateau was large enough not only for Khufu's pyramid but also for the extensive complex of temples, causeways, and subsidiary tombs that would surround it, as well as for the pyramids that would later be built there by Khufu's successors. The design of the pyramid itself was revolutionary. Rather than merely replicating his father's achievement, Khufu and Hemiunu conceived of a structure of unprecedented scale and precision. The pyramid would have a square base covering more than 13 acres, with each side measuring approximately 755 feet in length. The four sides would be oriented almost perfectly to the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with an accuracy that astounds modern engineers. The pyramid would rise to a height of 481 feet, making it not only the tallest pyramid in Egypt, but the tallest man-made structure in the entire world, a record it would hold for an astonishing 38 centuries. Until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral in England, in the year 1311 of the Common Era. To construct such a monument would require approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, though some of the granite blocks used in the internal chambers would weigh as much as 80 tons. The exterior would be covered with fine white limestone from the Tura quarries, carefully cut and polished to create smooth, gleaming surfaces that would reflect the sunlight and make the pyramid visible from great distances. The apex would be crowned with a pyramidion, possibly gilded with gold or electrum, which would catch the first rays of the morning sun and announce to all who beheld it the divine nature of the structure and its royal occupant. The symbolism of the pyramid's shape was deeply rooted in Egyptian religious belief. The pyramid was a solar symbol, representing the Benben, the primordial mound that rose from the waters of chaos at the moment of creation. It also represented a stairway or ramp by which the deceased king could ascend to the heavens to join the gods. Some scholars believe the pyramid's sloping sides represented rays of sunlight transformed into stone, creating a permanent pathway for the king to climb to the sun god Ra. With the design finalized and the location chosen, the next challenge was one of logistics and organization on a scale that few civilizations in history have matched. How does one move and lift millions of tons of stone? How does one feed, house, and coordinate thousands of workers over a period of decades? How does one cut stone with such precision using only copper tools and stone hammers? These questions have fascinated scholars for centuries. And while much remains uncertain, recent archaeological discoveries have shed considerable light on the methods employed. First, let us dispel a persistent myth. The pyramids were not built by slaves. This romantic notion, popularized by the Greek historian Herodotus writing more than 2,000 years after Khufu's reign and repeated in countless books and films, has been thoroughly debunked by modern archaeology. The evidence is now clear. The pyramids were built by skilled workers and seasonal laborers who were paid for their work, fed well, and provided with medical care. Archaeological excavations at Giza have uncovered the workers' village, a planned settlement that housed the men who built the pyramids. The village included long barracks, bakeries capable of producing enough bread to feed thousands of people, and administrative buildings where foremen recorded the progress of work crews. Animal bones found at the site reveal that the workers regularly ate beef, a luxury food in ancient Egypt, along with bread, beer, fish, and vegetables. These were not the rations of slaves, but of valued workers engaged in a project of national importance. Further evidence comes from inscriptions found on the blocks themselves. Many stones bear markings showing the names of work gangs such as Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. These names suggest a sense of pride and camaraderie among the workers, not the resentment one would expect from enslaved laborers. Medical examinations of skeletons from workers' cemeteries show that injured workers received medical treatment, including sophisticated bone-setting procedures, again inconsistent with the treatment of slave labor. The workforce was likely organized on a rotational basis. During the inundation season, when the Nile flooded the agricultural lands and farming was impossible, peasants from across Egypt would travel to Giza to work on the pyramid as a form of taxation and religious obligation. This system, known as corvée labor, allowed tens of thousands of temporary workers to be mobilized without disrupting agricultural production during the growing season. A core group of perhaps 4,000 to 5,000 skilled workers, stonemasons, carpenters, metal workers, surveyors, and engineers, worked year-round, while the temporary workforce during peak construction periods might have swelled to 20,000 or more. The quarrying of the limestone blocks began immediately. Most of the stone for the pyramid's core came from quarries right on the Giza plateau itself, minimizing transport distances for the bulk of the material. Workers used copper chisels and wooden wedges to cut trenches around the blocks they wished to extract. The technique was laborious but effective. Trenches would be cut on all 4 sides of a block, then wooden wedges would be driven into the stone and soaked with water. As the water was absorbed, the wood expanded with tremendous force, cracking the block free from the bedrock. Once freed, the blocks had to be moved. Recent experiments have shown that the ancient Egyptians likely used large wooden sledges, with the stones loaded onto them and then dragged across the ground by teams of workers pulling on ropes. To reduce friction, the ground in front of the sledge would be moistened with water, which has been shown to reduce the amount of force required by as much as half. Tomb paintings from ancient Egypt show exactly this technique in use, with workers pouring water in front of a sledge carrying a massive statue. Transportation of the fine white limestone casing stones from Tura across the Nile from Giza and of the granite from Aswan, nearly 500 miles to the south, required boats. The Nile was Egypt's highway, and the Egyptians were master shipbuilders and navigators. The Diary of Merer, mentioned earlier, describes in detail how his crews would load limestone blocks onto boats, sail or row them to Giza, unload them at harbors specially constructed for the purpose, and then return to the quarries for another load. Recent geological surveys have revealed that an ancient branch of the Nile, now vanished, once flowed much closer to the Giza plateau than the current river, and that the Egyptians constructed an extensive system of canals and basins to allow boats to deliver stone directly to the pyramid construction site. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all is how the blocks once delivered to Giza were lifted into place. The pyramid rose 210 courses high, with the topmost block sitting nearly 500 feet above the desert floor. Moving multi-ton blocks up such a structure seems almost impossible without modern machinery, yet it was accomplished using only the technology available in the 26th century before the Common Era. The most widely accepted theory is that the Egyptians used ramps. However, the details remain hotly debated. A single straight ramp from ground level to the top of the pyramid would need to be over a mile long to maintain a workable slope, and would require more material to build than the pyramid itself. A spiral ramp encircling the pyramid would work but would obscure the corners of the structure, making it impossible to check the precision of the angles during construction. French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin has proposed an intriguing alternative. An external ramp was used for the first 40 or 50 feet of construction, but beyond that, an internal ramp was built within the pyramid itself, spiraling upward inside the structure. This would explain the otherwise puzzling lack of evidence for massive external ramps, and would have allowed the corners to remain visible throughout construction. While Houdin's theory remains controversial, recent scans of the pyramid using thermal imaging and cosmic ray tomography have detected anomalies consistent with the presence of internal voids and chambers that might be remnants of such ramps. Regardless of the exact method used, it is clear that the construction proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Conservative estimates suggest that an average of 35 blocks per hour would need to be set in place during a 10-hour workday to complete the pyramid in 20 to 25 years, the period most commonly assigned to its construction. This seems impossible until one realizes that, with hundreds of workers organized into numerous crews, each responsible for different sections of the pyramid, such a rate becomes achievable. The precision of the construction is even more remarkable than its scale. The base of the pyramid is leveled to within less than 1 inch across its entire 755-foot width. The 4 sides are oriented to the cardinal directions with an average error of only 3 minutes of arc. Roughly 1/20th of a single degree the stones of the outer casing, before most of them were removed in later centuries to build other structures fit together with joints so tight that a knife blade could not be inserted between them. This precision was achieved through careful surveying and the use of simple but effective tools. Ancient Egyptian engineers used Merkhet devices, essentially plumb lines and sighting rods, to establish perfectly level baselines and vertical lines. They used the stars to determine true north with remarkable accuracy, likely by observing the circular path of stars around the celestial pole. They used weighted cords and set squares to ensure right angles. Every measurement was checked and rechecked, because the consequences of error would compound with each successive course of stone. As the pyramid rose course by course, year by year, it began to dominate the landscape. Visitors approaching Memphis from any direction would have seen the gleaming white structure growing ever taller against the deep blue sky. At night, when the moon was full, the pyramid would have glowed with reflected moonlight, a ghostly beacon visible for miles across the dark desert. Inside the pyramid, a complex system of passages and chambers was taking shape. A descending passage led down from an entrance on the north face cut into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, terminating in an unfinished subterranean chamber. From the descending passage, an ascending passage climbed upward into the heart of the pyramid. This ascending passage, barely 3 feet wide and 4 feet high, was originally concealed by large stone blocks to protect the burial chambers from tomb robbers. The ascending passage opened into the Grand Gallery, one of the most impressive architectural spaces of the ancient world. This corbelled corridor rises at a steep angle for more than 150 feet, with a ceiling that soars 26 feet above the narrow floor. The purpose of the Grand Gallery remains mysterious. It may have been used to store the enormous granite plugs that would be released after the king's burial to block the ascending passage. It may have had a more symbolic purpose, representing the king's ascent to the heavens. At the upper end of the Grand Gallery, a low horizontal passage led to the king's chamber, the intended resting place of Khufu's mummy. This chamber was constructed entirely of massive blocks of red granite from Aswan, some weighing as much as 80 tons. The chamber measures about 34 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 19 feet high. Its most prominent feature is the red granite sarcophagus that still rests there today, carved from a single enormous block of granite. The sarcophagus is unadorned, lacking even an inscription, and its lid has been lost for centuries, possibly millennia. Above the king's chamber, Khufu's architects constructed a series of 5 relieving chambers, each separated by enormous granite beams. These chambers served to distribute the weight of the millions of tons of stone above, protecting the burial chamber from crushing pressure. The topmost relieving chamber has a pointed ceiling of huge limestone blocks arranged in a gable shape, further dispersing the weight. These chambers, inaccessible in ancient times, bear quarry marks and inscriptions in red ochre, including Khufu's name, providing definitive proof of the pyramid's builder. While the focus naturally falls on the pyramid itself, we must remember that it was only the centerpiece of a vast mortuary complex. From the valley floor, a causeway, once covered and decorated with reliefs, rose more than 40 feet as it climbed the plateau to the pyramid. At the base of the pyramid stood the mortuary temple where priests would perform daily rituals to sustain the king in the afterlife, offering food, drink, incense, and prayers. Unfortunately, this temple was largely destroyed in ancient times when its stones were quarried for other buildings, so we know little of its exact appearance. Around the pyramid, smaller pyramids were constructed for Khufu's queens. 3 such pyramids stand in a neat row on the eastern side of the Great Pyramid, each a smaller version of the king's tomb, though still substantial structures in their own right. These pyramids were burial places for Khufu's wives, including Meretrites I, his principal consort, and Henutsen, mother of several of his sons. To the east of the pyramids, in organized rows along streets, stood the mastaba tombs of Khufu's family members and high officials. These rectangular structures, though far smaller than the pyramids, were still impressive monuments. Built of fine limestone and containing multiple chambers decorated with reliefs, showing scenes of daily life, ensuring that the deceased would have everything needed in the afterlife. The most impressive of these mastabas belonged to Hemiunu, the vizier and architect whose genius made the Great Pyramid possible. On the south side of the pyramid, archaeologists have discovered 5 boat pits. 2 of these pits contained actual boats dismantled and carefully arranged for burial. In 1954, Egyptian archaeologist Kamal el-Malak made one of the most spectacular discoveries in Egyptian archaeology when he found the first of these boats sealed beneath enormous limestone blocks. When the pit was opened, it contained 1,224 pieces of cedar wood, representing a complete ship that had been carefully disassembled. The boat was reconstructed over a period of 14 years by master restorer Ahmed Youssef Mustafa, and the result was breathtaking. The vessel measures 142 feet in length and 19 feet in width, making it one of the largest ships of antiquity. Constructed primarily of Lebanese cedar using the ancient shell-first technique, the boat was held together not with nails but with rope lashings threaded through carefully crafted joints. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, and experts agree that the boat would be seaworthy even today if launched onto water. The purpose of these boats, often called solar boats or solar barks, has been much debated. The ancient Egyptians believed that the sun god Ra traveled across the sky each day in his solar boat, the Manjet, and through the underworld each night in another boat, the Mesektet. By burying boats with the deceased king, they provided him with the means to join Ra on this eternal journey, sailing across the heavens and being reborn each dawn. Some scholars believe Khufu's boat may have been used only once, to to carry the king's mummified body from Memphis to Giza for burial. Evidence of water damage on the hull suggests the boat had been in water at least once. Others argue that the boat was always intended purely as a symbolic vessel for the afterlife and was never meant to be used on earthly waters. A second boat pit, discovered in the same year as the first but not opened until decades later, contained another similar vessel, suggesting that Khufu was provided with multiple boats for his celestial travels. The entire pyramid complex, from the valley temple by the river to the pyramid itself, from the causeway to the subsidiary pyramids and the surrounding tombs, represented a complete cosmological model. This was not merely a tomb, but a machine for resurrection, a permanent structure through which the king would be reborn and ascend to join the gods. The construction of the Great Pyramid dominated Khufu's reign, but it was far from his only accomplishment. Egypt during his time was a prosperous, well-organized state, engaged in extensive trade and resource extraction across a wide area. Khufu sent expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula to mine turquoise and copper at sites like Wadi Magare, where rock inscriptions bearing his name still survive. These minerals were essential for Egyptian civilization. Copper for tools and weapons, turquoise for jewelry and amulets. The king also maintained Egypt's relationship with Byblos, the great trading port in what is now Lebanon. Egyptian texts mention multiple expeditions to Byblos during Khufu's reign, and archaeological evidence from Byblos itself confirms extensive Egyptian activity there during the Fourth Dynasty. The Lebanese cedar obtained through this trade was used not only for the solar boats but also for roofing beams in temples and palaces, for fine furniture, and for shipbuilding. Further south, Egyptian expeditions penetrated deep into Nubia, establishing or maintaining a fortress at Buhen near the second cataract of the Nile. This fortress served both military and commercial purposes, protecting Egypt's southern border, while also facilitating trade in gold, ivory, ebony, and other luxury goods from Africa's interior. Diorite, an extremely hard dark stone prized for statuary, was quarried in the Nubian desert northwest of Abu Simbel, and inscriptions there also bear Khufu's name. Egypt's economy during Khufu's reign was robust and well managed. The agricultural foundation remained strong, with the annual Nile flood continuing to be regular and bountiful. The centralized administration ensured efficient collection of taxes, organized labor for state projects, and maintained Egypt's extensive system of irrigation canals and basins. Trade brought wealth flowing into the kingdom, and the enormous construction projects at Giza themselves served as economic engines, providing employment and redistributing resources throughout society. Religion permeated every aspect of life in Khufu's Egypt. The king himself was worshipped as a living god, the earthly manifestation of Horus, son of Osiris and Isis. His role was to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order and balance that kept chaos at bay. Through his performance of daily rituals, his construction of temples, and his role as high priest of all Egyptian cults, Khufu ensured the gods' continued favor and Egypt's prosperity. The cult of Ra, the sun god, grew in prominence during the 4th dynasty. Khufu's son and eventual successor, Jedefre, would be the first pharaoh to officially adopt the title Son of Ra, making explicit the king's divine solar lineage. This title would be used by all subsequent pharaohs throughout Egyptian history. The pyramid itself, with its solar symbolism and its purpose of facilitating the king's ascension to join Ra, reflected this increased emphasis on solar religion. But the sun god was only one among a vast pantheon of deities worshipped throughout Egypt. Each nome had its local gods, each city its protective deities, each aspect of life its divine guardians. There was Ptah, the creator god of Memphis; Hathor, goddess of love, music, and motherhood; Thoth, god of wisdom and writing; Anubis, god of embalming and guide of the dead, and hundreds of others. Temples throughout Egypt were supported by endowments from the royal treasury and from private donations, and maintaining the cults of the gods was considered essential to the kingdom's well-being. Khufu himself was particularly devoted to Khnum, as evidenced by his name. Khnum was the ram-headed god who controlled the Nile flood and who had created humanity by fashioning people from clay on his potter's wheel. By naming himself after Khnum, Khufu associated himself with creation and with the life-giving force of the Nile itself. Some scholars believe that Khufu may have seen himself as a divine creator in his own right, shaping Egypt's destiny as Khnum shaped human beings. Art and culture flourished during the 4th dynasty. The private tombs around the pyramids are decorated with some of the finest reliefs ever produced in ancient Egypt, showing scenes of daily life rendered with remarkable skill and attention to detail. We see farmers plowing fields and harvesting grain, fishermen casting nets into the Nile, hunters pursuing waterfowl in papyrus marshes, craftsmen at their work, musicians and dancers performing at banquets, and ships sailing on the river with their sails filled with wind. These reliefs were not merely decorative but served an important religious purpose. The Egyptians believed that the images in a tomb could become real in the afterlife, providing the deceased with everything shown in the scenes. A man whose tomb showed him receiving offerings of bread, beer, meat, and vegetables would magically receive those offerings for eternity. A woman whose tomb depicted her estates with their workers and livestock would possess those estates forever. Sculpture also reached new heights during this period. Although very few statues of Khufu himself survived, we possess numerous statues of his courtiers and family members that demonstrate the skill of 4th dynasty sculptors. These works, carved in hard stones like diorite, granite, and basalt, show an extraordinary mastery of technique. The artists could render human features with remarkable realism while also idealizing them to convey the subject's status and dignity. Yet for all his power and accomplishments, Khufu remained human, subject to the same mortality as the humblest of his subjects. The king had a large family, which was typical for Egyptian pharaohs. Marriage between close relatives, including half-siblings, was common in royal families, both to concentrate power and wealth and because royals believed they were too elevated to marry commoners. Khufu's principal wife was Meritites I, who bore him his eldest son Kawab, the crown prince who would have succeeded to the throne. But fate intervened. Kawab died before his father under circumstances that remain mysterious. Some scholars have suggested he may have been murdered by one of his half-brothers, Jedefre, who wanted the throne for himself. But this remains pure speculation with no solid evidence to support it. Khufu had other wives as well, including Hanutzen, who was probably the mother of several of his sons, including Khafra, who would eventually succeed his older brother Jedefre and build the second Great Pyramid at Giza. In total, Khufu is believed to have fathered at least 9 sons and 15 daughters, an enormous family that provided him with numerous potential heirs and allowed him to cement political alliances by marrying his daughters to important nobles. Among Khufu's sons, several deserve mention. Jedefor, also known as Hor-Jedef, was renowned as a wise man and philosopher. His teachings were still being copied and studied centuries after his death, and he appears as a character in the famous Westcar Papyrus, a Middle Kingdom literary text that features Khufu as its central figure. In this text, Jedefor brings a famous magician to his father's court, and the magician performs wonders and prophesies the coming of future kings. This brings us to a crucial question. What was Khufu actually like as a person and as a ruler? The answer is frustratingly elusive. Unlike some pharaohs whose personalities shine through in their monuments and inscriptions, Khufu remains enigmatic. We have almost no contemporary texts that describe his character or his personal qualities. The small ivory figurine mentioned earlier, barely 3 inches tall, is the only complete portrait of him that survives, and it shows us little more than a stylized figure wearing the crown of Lower Egypt and sitting on a throne. Later Egyptian tradition painted a mixed picture of Khufu. During the Old Kingdom and into the Middle Kingdom, Khufu was honored and remembered. His mortuary cult continued for centuries, with priests maintaining offerings at his temple and ordinary Egyptians making pilgrimages to Giza. By the end of the 6th dynasty, at least 67 mortuary priests and 6 high officials were serving his cult, a testament to his lasting prestige. But as centuries passed and Egypt entered periods of decline and foreign domination, attitudes toward the pyramid builders changed. By the time the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt, around 450 years before the Common Era, more than 2,000 years after Khufu's death. The locals who served as his guides told him shocking stories about the ancient king. According to Herodotus, Khufu was a terrible tyrant who closed the temples, forbade religious observances, and forced his entire population into slavery to build his pyramid. In the most notorious story, Herodotus claims that when Khufu ran short of money, he ordered his own daughter to work as a prostitute to raise funds for the pyramid's construction, and that she demanded from each client a stone block, which she used to build her own small pyramid. Modern Egyptologists universally reject these stories as false, products of misunderstanding, anti-Egyptian prejudice, and the moralizing attitudes of later periods. Herodotus's sources were living in a very different Egypt from Khufu's, one that had experienced conquest by Assyrians, Persians, and others, and had developed very different religious attitudes. To later Egyptians and to Greeks, the enormous pyramids appeared as monuments to overweening pride and tyranny, evidence of how powerful men oppressed their subjects. The philosophical attitudes of the Greeks may also have colored these accounts. To Greek thinkers, excessive wealth and power inevitably led to hubris and divine punishment. The pyramids, being the largest and most permanent expressions of royal power ever created, would naturally have been interpreted through this moral lens as evidence of tyrannical excess. Moreover, we must remember that Herodotus was writing more than 2 millennia after Khufu's death, separated from the 4th dynasty by a span of time greater than the span separating us from the height of the Roman Empire. Any stories that had been preserved would have been distorted by oral transmission across countless generations. Herodotus himself was credulous and often included fantastic tales in his histories, without distinguishing them from more reliable accounts. A more balanced view comes from the Westcar Papyrus, which dates to the Middle Kingdom, but was likely based on earlier traditions. In this text, Khufu is portrayed neither as a saint nor as a tyrant, but as a typical king, interested in magic and wonders, capable of both generosity and callousness, concerned with ensuring his dynasty's continuation. In one famous scene, Khufu offers to execute a prisoner so that a magician can demonstrate his power to restore the severed head. But the magician demurs and performs the trick with a bird instead. This suggests a king capable of ruthlessness but not gratuitously cruel. The truth is likely that Khufu was neither the monster of Herodotus's account nor a universally benevolent ruler. He was a powerful king who ruled with absolute authority in a society that accepted such authority as divinely ordained. He commanded the resources of an entire kingdom and directed them toward projects that glorified himself and the gods. He expected and received the labor of his subjects, though that labor was organized within a traditional system of taxation and obligation that his subjects accepted as legitimate. What we can say with confidence is that Khufu was an effective administrator and organizer. One cannot mobilize and coordinate the resources necessary to build the Great Pyramid without possessing extraordinary organizational abilities. The pyramid's very existence is testimony to Khufu's success in maintaining Egypt's prosperity, in inspiring or compelling his subjects to extraordinary efforts, and in successfully managing one of the most complex projects ever undertaken in the ancient world. The construction of the pyramid likely dominated the last 2 decades or more of Khufu's reign. The length of his rule remains uncertain. According to the Turin King List, an ancient Egyptian document listing the kings and the lengths of their reigns, Khufu ruled for 23 years. Manetho, the Egyptian priest who wrote a history of Egypt for the Greeks, credits him with an improbably long reign of 63 years. Modern scholars generally accept a reign of approximately 20 to 25 years as most likely, though some evidence suggests it could have been longer, perhaps as much as 30 years. The highest securely dated monument from Khufu's reign comes from the 27th year, the date given in the papyri from Wadi al-Jarf. This confirms that Khufu ruled for at least that long, and that the pyramid construction was still ongoing in year 27. Since the pyramid was probably completed toward the end of his reign, this suggests a total reign of close to 30 years may be accurate. As Khufu grew older, he would have watched his pyramid rising course by course, growing from a low platform of stone into a mountain that dominated the landscape. He would have made regular inspections of the work, accompanied by Hemiunu and other officials climbing the ramps to examine the precision of the stone cutting, to review the plans for the interior chambers, to ensure that the work proceeded according to his vision. The king would also have overseen the preparation of other elements of his funerary complex. The solar boats were being constructed, their cedar planks carefully cut and shaped to fit together without nails. The statues that would be placed in the temples were being carved by master sculptors. The reliefs that would decorate the walls were being planned and executed. Everything had to be ready for the day when Khufu would journey to join the gods. That day came, inevitably, though we do not know exactly when or how Khufu died. He was probably in his 50s, which would have been considered a good age in ancient Egypt, where life expectancy was considerably shorter than in the modern world. There is no record of how he died, whether from illness, accident, or simply old age. His death would have been announced with great ceremony, and all of Egypt would have entered a period of official mourning. Khufu's body would have been taken to the Per Nefer, the house of beauty, where the process of mummification would be carried out. This process, already ancient by Khufu's time, would take 70 days. The internal organs, except for the heart, would be removed and preserved separately in canopic jars. The body would be desiccated using natron salt. then wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages with protective amulets placed between the layers. Prayers and spells from the developing corpus of funerary texts would be recited throughout the process, each word imbued with magical power to protect the king and facilitate his resurrection. When the mummification was complete, the funeral procession would have been spectacular. The king's mummified body, enclosed in a coffin and probably a sarcophagus, would have been placed on one of the solar boats, perhaps the very boat that archaeologists would discover more than 4,000 years later, and transported across the Nile to Giza. Priests would have walked alongside, chanting prayers and burning incense. Professional mourners would have wailed and torn their clothes in ritual displays of grief. The procession would have included nobles, officials, and representatives from every part of Egypt, all come to pay their respects to the God King. At Giza, the funeral cortege would have climbed the causeway to the mortuary temple at the base of the pyramid. Here, final rituals would have been performed, including the crucial opening of the mouth ceremony, in which a priest would touch the mouth and eyes of the mummy with special instruments, ritually restoring the deceased's senses so that he could eat, drink, see, and speak in the afterlife. Finally, the mummy would have been carried up into the pyramid through the passages that had been constructed for this purpose. The ascending passage, though narrow, was just wide enough to allow the sarcophagus to be maneuvered upward. In the king's chamber, the mummy would have been placed in the granite sarcophagus, along with grave goods including jewelry, weapons, magical implements, and other items the king would need in the afterlife. Then came the moment of sealing. The priests withdrew from the chamber, down the grand gallery and into the ascending passage. Behind them, workers released the enormous granite plugs that had been stored in the grand gallery, allowing them to slide down and block the ascending passage forever. The entrance to the passage was concealed with a casing stone that matched the surrounding stones perfectly, hiding the doorway from potential tomb robbers. Or so the plan went. In reality, we know that the Great Pyramid was robbed in antiquity, probably multiple times. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty and has been empty for at least 1,000 years, possibly much longer. What happened to Khufu's mummy remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. It was probably destroyed by tomb robbers who ripped it apart, searching for the gold and jewels that would have been wrapped with it. The violation of Khufu's tomb reminds us that for all the enormous effort expended in its construction, for all the precision of its design and the grandeur of its scale, the pyramid ultimately failed in its primary purpose: to protect the king's body and ensure his eternal resurrection. Yet in another sense, the pyramid succeeded beyond anything Khufu could have imagined. His body may have been destroyed, but his monument endures, and his name is known and spoken by millions of people worldwide, more than 4,000 years after his death. In a real sense, Khufu has achieved immortality. After Khufu's death, His son, Djedefre, succeeded to the throne. Djedefre's reign was relatively brief, lasting only about 8 years, and he built his pyramid not at Giza but at Abu Roash, a few miles to the north. After Djedefre came Khafra, another of Khufu's sons, who returned to Giza and built the second Great Pyramid there, slightly smaller than his father's, but appearing taller because it stands on higher ground. Khafra also probably commissioned the Great Sphinx, though this attribution remains debated. The Sphinx's face is generally believed to represent Khafra's features, but some scholars argue it might actually represent Khufu or an earlier king. Khafra was succeeded by his son Menkaure, Khufu's grandson, who built the third and smallest of the Giza pyramids. With Menkaure's death, the great age of pyramid building at Giza came to an end. Later pharaohs would build smaller pyramids at other sites, but none would match the scale and precision of the Fourth Dynasty monuments. The mortuary cult of Khufu continued for centuries after his death. Priests continued to maintain his temples and make offerings at his pyramid. Ordinary Egyptians made pilgrimages to Giza to pray at the tombs of the god kings. During the 5th and 6th dynasties, as the central government gradually weakened and Egypt entered the First Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation and economic decline, the pyramid complexes at Giza remained important religious sites. Even after the Old Kingdom collapsed entirely and Egypt was reunified under the Middle Kingdom pharaohs of the 11th and 12th dynasties, Khufu was still remembered and honored. The Westcar papyrus composed during this period featured him as its main character, suggesting that stories about the Great Pyramid builder were still being told nearly 1,000 years after his death. During the New Kingdom, over a millennium after Khufu's reign, the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty showed renewed interest in the monuments of their distant predecessors. Amenhotep II erected a temple near the Great Sphinx, and his son Thutmose IV cleared sand from around the Sphinx and placed a stela between its paws, recording a dream in which the Sphinx promised him the kingship if he would free it from the encroaching desert. A temple to the goddess Isis was built at one of the small pyramids at Giza, demonstrating that the site remained a place of active worship. During the 26th dynasty, often called the Sate period, there was a deliberate revival of Old Kingdom art and culture. The Sate pharaohs consciously imitated the styles and monuments of their distant predecessors, seeking to connect themselves with Egypt's glorious past. The pyramid complexes at Giza were restored and renovated, and the cults of the Old Kingdom kings were revived. This was more than 2,000 years after Khufu's death. Yet his name and monument still commanded reverence. But as Egypt passed under foreign domination, first the Persians, then the Greeks under Alexander and the Ptolemies, then finally the Romans, attitudes toward the ancient monuments gradually changed. The pyramids became objects of wonder and speculation for foreign visitors, who no longer understood their religious significance. Greek and Roman tourists scratched graffiti on the monuments, just as tourists do today. Learned men speculated about how and why they were built, often arriving at wildly inaccurate conclusions. It was during this period that the negative stories about Khufu began to circulate, the stories that Herodotus and later writers recorded. To people who no longer shared the religious worldview of the Old Kingdom, who did not understand the pyramid as a machine for resurrection or the pharaoh as a living god, the enormous monuments could only be explained as products of tyranny and slave labor. The Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century of the Common Era brought another shift in perspective. The pyramids were now seen through an Islamic lens, and Arab writers created new legends about them. Some claimed the pyramids had been built before Noah's flood as repositories of ancient knowledge. Others attributed them to legendary kings with fantastical names. The name Khufu was rendered as Saurid or Salhuk in Arabic traditions, and the pharaoh became a figure of folklore rather than history. In the medieval period, the pyramids were quarried for building stone. The fine white limestone casing that had once covered the Great Pyramid was stripped away to build mosques and palaces in Cairo. The granite from the mortuary temple was similarly removed and reused. For centuries, the pyramid served as a convenient stone quarry, losing its smooth outer surface and revealing the stepped core structure we see today. When European travelers and scholars began visiting Egypt in earnest during the 17th and 18th centuries, the pyramids became objects of intense curiosity and speculation. Many fantastical theories were proposed. Some claimed the pyramids were grain silos based on a misinterpretation of the Bible. Others thought they were astronomical observatories or monuments encoding advanced mathematical knowledge. The birth of modern Egyptology in the early 19th century, marked by Napoleon's expedition to Egypt and the decipherment of hieroglyphics by Champollion, finally made it possible to understand the pyramids in their proper historical context. Scholars could now read the ancient texts, date the monuments accurately, and begin to reconstruct the civilization that built them. Today, the Great Pyramid of Khufu is recognized as one of the most remarkable achievements in human history. It is the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and the only one still standing. It has been studied by archaeologists, engineers, architects, and enthusiasts for 2 centuries, and it continues to yield new discoveries and insights. Modern technology has allowed us to explore the pyramid in ways that would have been impossible even a few decades ago. Ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and cosmic ray tomography have revealed hidden chambers and voids within the structure. In 2017, an international team of scientists announced the discovery of a large void above the Grand Gallery, a space roughly the size of the Grand Gallery itself, whose purpose remains unknown. This discovery demonstrates that even after millennia of study, the pyramid still guards secrets. The pyramid stands today as a monument not just to Khufu, but to the entire civilization that built it. It represents the culmination of centuries of architectural experimentation, the mobilization of a nation's resources, and the coordinated efforts of thousands of skilled workers. It embodies ancient Egyptian religious beliefs about death and the afterlife, about the divinity of kingship, and about the eternal struggle of order against chaos. For the modern visitor to Giza, standing before the Great Pyramid is an overwhelming experience. The sheer scale of the structure, even diminished by the loss of its outer casing and its capstone, is difficult to comprehend. Each of the massive limestone blocks at the pyramid's base is larger than a person. The structure rises 210 courses high, its bulk seeming to dwarf everything around it. On hot summer days, heat radiates from the pale stone and the air shimmers with mirages. In winter, when rain occasionally falls on the desert, the pyramid stones darken and glisten. Inside visitors can still enter through the original entrance or through a hole cut by medieval treasure hunters and climb the narrow passages to reach the grand gallery and the king's chamber. The experience is claustrophobic and disorienting. The passages are low and steep, the air is stale, and the weight of millions of tons of stone presses down from above. In the king's chamber, the granite walls are bare and austere, and the empty sarcophagus sits silent, bereft of its royal occupant. Outside again, visitors can see the remains of the mortuary temple, the causeways, the subsidiary pyramids, and the vast necropolises of mastaba tombs stretching away across the plateau. They can visit the relocated Solar Boat Museum at the Grand Egyptian Museum, where Khufu's reconstructed vessel is displayed in all its ancient glory. They can contemplate the Sphinx, gazing eternally toward the east, waiting for the sun that it has watched rise more than 1.6 million times. The pyramid has become a symbol, an icon recognized around the world. It appears on Egypt's currency and in its tourist promotions. It has inspired countless works of art, literature, and film. It has been the subject of both serious scholarship and wild speculation, of scientific study and mystical contemplation. It has survived earthquakes, erosion, plundering, and the simple passage of time, still standing after more than 45 centuries. A testament to the skill of its builders and the enduring power of human ambition. But behind all the symbols and the superlatives, we must remember that the pyramid was built by and for real people. It was conceived in the mind of a young king who wanted to ensure his eternal life and glorify his reign. It was designed by a brilliant architect who solved unprecedented engineering challenges. It was built by thousands of workers who quarried the stone, transported the blocks, and lifted them into place course by course, over the course of decades. These workers left their marks on some of the stones, signs of their presence and their labor, small signatures on a monumental canvas. Khufu himself remains enigmatic despite the enormous monument that bears his name. We have his pyramid, but we lack the texts that might have revealed his thoughts, his hopes, his fears. We have a tiny statue that shows us only an idealized royal figure, not a real human face. We have later traditions that contradict each other, some praising him as a wise ruler, others condemning him as a tyrant. Perhaps in the end, the pyramid itself is the truest record of Khufu's reign. It speaks of extraordinary organizational ability, of resources marshaled on an unprecedented scale, of technical knowledge and engineering skill, of religious devotion and absolute confidence in the divine nature of kingship. It speaks of a civilization at the height of its powers, capable of achieving what must have seemed impossible. And it speaks of the eternal human desire to transcend mortality, to create something that will last beyond one's brief lifetime, to be remembered. In this, Khufu succeeded absolutely. His body may have turned to dust millennia ago, but his monument stands, and his name is still spoken with wonder and respect more than 4,500 years after his death. As we conclude our journey through Khufu's reign and stand in imagination before his Great Pyramid, we are reminded of the passage of time and the persistence of memory. Empires rise and fall, civilizations bloom and fade, languages are spoken and forgotten, but some achievements transcend their time and become part of the shared heritage of all humanity. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is such an achievement. It connects us to our distant past, to the people who lived and worked and dreamed along the Nile when the world was young. It reminds us of what humans can accomplish when they unite their efforts toward a common goal. It challenges us to reach for our own impossible dreams, to build our own monuments, not necessarily of stone, but of knowledge, art, compassion, and understanding. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let your mind wander through the corridors of the pyramid. Climb the steep passages, stand in the king's chamber where Khufu once lay. Feel the weight of history, the presence of the past. Remember that we are part of a long human story, inheritors of achievements made by people we will never know, but whose works still inspire us. The stars that Khufu gazed upon from his palace in Memphis still shine in the sky above us. The Nile still flows northward to the sea, its waters carrying life through the desert, as they have for millions of years. And at Giza the pyramid stands, waiting for the dawn as it has waited for more than 4,000 dawns before this one. Sleep well, and dream of ancient wonders, of massive stones lifted into place by human hands, of a pharaoh's ambition transformed into eternal stone, of a civilization that still speaks to us across the vast gulf of time. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the ancient past, if you'd like to explore more stories from history's most fascinating periods, please consider subscribing to our channel. Leave a like if you found this story interesting, and share it with others who might enjoy a relaxing journey through time. In the comments, let us know which ancient civilization or historical figure you'd like us to explore next. Until then, rest well, and may your dreams be filled with the timeless beauty of Egypt's golden age.